that actually this occasion is much more than the felicitation of an individual. It is the celebration of a thought, the thought of a liberal, secular, democratic and progressive society. A thought that Sri Datta Naik honestly believes in and has worked all his life to spread. This is a thought that all of today's eminent guests and all of you in the audience strongly believe in. Thank you for your warm welcome to all our guests and Sushanta and Datta Naik. I would now request Dr. Francisco Culasso, eminent cardiologist and convener of the Datta Damodar Naik Felicitation Committee, to address the gathering.
Dr. Shashi Tharoor, renowned author, former Union Minister, international diplomat. Dr. Ganesh Devi, eminent linguist, founder of the Dakshinyan Abhiyan. Shri Vinod Shirsat, editor of Sadhana Weekly Pune. Shri Avdut Timlaw, eminent industrialist. Other dignitaries on the dais, in front of the dais, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to everyone. Good evening. It is an absolute honor to welcome you all as we gather to celebrate the remarkable Datta on his 70th birthday. Happy 70th. Today is the day to honor your incredible journey and the legacy you continue to create. My friendship with Datta spans over 30 years. Though I must admit, the world did seem to know that one Datta existed even before we met. Back then, I just endured one of life's my most profound losses, the passing of my son. As I withdrew into a shell, grieving and searching for meaning, fate brought me to an answer, an article penned by Datta, our Datta Bab. It was a bold and passionate call to protect Goa's secular harmony. It resonated deeply with me, igniting a spark that pulled me back to life and purpose. From that moment, Datta became not just a name only, but a beacon of inspiration and a call to action. Give him a hand, please. Through challenges, through threats, Datta was always courage and conviction. However, I must confess, we also had our lighter days with what we called the Saturday Club, where we discussed all pressing issues, planned strategies for the next week, and socialized with a few drinks or two. Our Datta is a rare blend of talents: businessman, writer, thinker, and social activist. Many times he told me, you know, business is neutral. However, despite that, he has remained always fearless, principled. He applies his well-trained mind to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. He has always stood against wrongdoing, speaking the truth with an unwavering conviction. Beyond his intellect, my friends, Datta is a man of extraordinary warmth and humility, a true lodestone of love and service. He is also full of wit and humor, which endorses himself to everyone he meets. As we celebrate Datta, we also celebrate the privilege of ourselves growing older. Our wrinkles and gray hairs are badges of resilience, proof of lives lived with honor, courage, and conviction. Datta Bab, you embody this spirit, inspiring us to embrace life with further grace and determination. So, dear friend, my dearest friend, I say again, happy birthday to you. May you continue to shoot for the moon, knowing you have already landed among the stars. Here's to Datta, a man who makes 70 look extraordinary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. We will add to your welcome by presenting floral bouquets to our guests. Datta's grandson, Ranveer, claimed that he had the right to welcome the guests. And so, Ranveer, please present the bouquet first to Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Ganesh Devi. Shri Vinod Shirsat. Shri Audut Bab Timlo. And there's one more. This is the one to your grandmother, Sushanta, for being the rock-solid support that she has been in 70 years, celebrating 70 years with Datta. Thank you, Ranveer. We have amongst us Dr. Ganesh Devi, eminent linguist, literary critic, thinker, editor, educator, cultural activist, recipient of the Padma Shri and Sahitya Akademi Award winner. Dr. Devi, may I please request you to say a few words?
Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Madam Sushanta ji, friend Datta Naik, all eminent persons present here, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a very enviable task to be asked to say a few words about Datta Naik. Words won't be enough if I were to say everything I have to say about Datta Naik. But I feel very happy. I shall not use privilege or honored, because it was a call of affection that brought me here. I feel absolutely happy. My joy knows no limits. When I am here this evening to felicitate you on your being 70, and I hope, if everything goes all right, 30 years from now I shall be here again. So I wish you a long life, and me too. See, I have been coming to Goa off and on, and for me, personally for me, in two of my life's missions, Goa stood by me. One is the People's Linguistic Survey of India, and in that, Bhai Mauzo, Damodar Mauzo, Jnanpith Award winner, writer, you know him, he gave tremendous support and made that mission successful. That was a scholarly mission, a people's movement, focusing diversity. The second mission was of a different nature, and that was Dakshinayan. And in Dakshinayan, I can say with absolutely no hesitation that if Datta Naik had not involved himself in Dakshinayan, the movement would not have shaped the way it did. And I'll speak about Dakshinayan in a while. But just before I do that, I would like to also say that when I first met him in the context of Dakshinayan, and I saw this absolutely charming, magnanimous person, when he has a presence, when he comes to a meeting, he occupies the space. There is something in him which attracts you to him. What he says, what he does not say is even more important, because he measures his words and says them very thoughtfully. If you do not mind my giving a couple of literary references, I think of a poem by T.S. Eliot, which refers to the Brihad Aranyak, in which the story of Prajapati having created this world is mentioned. And having created the world, Prajapati dances with joy, and then all these Manavas, Danavas, Daityas are there. And he asks them, did you understand the meaning of my dance? And each one gives a different answer. One of them says, you said Dayadvam. be kind, be compassionate. The next one says, Damyata, learn to control your anger. The third says, and this is the Devas, the group of Devas, who say to Prajapati, Datta. Datta. The meaning is give, learn to give. The word Datta is to give. My second literary reference is in Shakespeare's King Lear. Shakespeare has described the person King Lear as every inch a king. May I say, Datta Naik is every inch Datta. He has been giving very generously. Philanthropy is his second nature. In personal life, sometimes he might be very conservative on spending, expenditure. I have seen that. But when it comes to giving, there is rarely a match I have seen among the writers in India who have been giving so much to the society. So he has lived up to his name all his life. He reminds me of a strange thing. I mean, please don't laugh when I mention this. Soon after independence, Jawaharlal Nehru adopted a policy which was based on what is called the Bombay Plan. So the Bombay Plan itself was dismissed. And that plan was to bring industry, cooperative sector, and government sector together. To my mind, Datta Naik is the Bombay Plan of Goa. He is an industrialist and he does good business, a businessman rather than industrialist, and is successful there. He is a socialist, which is rather strange for a businessman. And he has his individual intellectual pursuit. So, here is the Bombay Plan of Goa in Datta Naik, whose every inch Datta, in the Sanskrit sense of the term. Dakshinayan brought him and me together. Most of you know, but some of you may not, that about 10 years back, there was a spate of murders of writers in this country. Dabolkar, Pansare was not a writer, but he was killed because of his little booklet called Who Was Shivaji? Shivaji Kaun Hota? Then Kalburgi. The Gauri's turn had still not come. And at that time, many of us in India, many of us in this country, felt that we should return the Sahitya Akademi Award. 8 or 9, I may be wrong, 8 or 9 of writers from Goa who had got this award met and seriously considered if they would or they should return the award. It was at that time I was in Gujarat, and there was another writer from Gujarat, Anil Joshi, who had written the award. I did. There are many others in the country, Nayantara Saigal and Ashok Bajpai and many others. That entire episode, if it was just an episode, and I don't think it was an episode, that entire phenomenon came to be known as award wapasi in the realm of the TV that wanted to ridicule these writers. These writers who had written the awards decided to visit the widows of Pansare, Dabolkar, Kalburgi, and so from Pune, Kolhapur, we went to Dharwad. In Dharwad, your very courageous, brave writers from Goa joined us. Damodar Mauzo took the lead, and Datta Naik was in the group. And when Datta Naik saw how so many from Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, so many states have come together to resist something, and I shall speak about that, what that thing was. He decided that he will give himself to this movement, Dakshina, and going south. And also because now 14 January, Uttarayan comes, Dakshinayan is when the darkness increases. Days are shorter and nights are longer. He said that he would give himself fully to this movement. And from that moment on, for several years, he was with the Dakshinayan writers in Nagpur, at the Wardha Ashram, in Dandi, in Gujarat, at Pune, in Dharwad, wherever we met. And all that we were saying was, don't be afraid, have courage. And he took upon himself the responsibility of mobilizing, bringing together writers from Goa, form a group. And in fact, he invited all the writers from India who have courage, to Goa. And not very far from here, we had a march from Lohia to Ravindra Bhavan to Lohia Chowk. That goes to the story of independence of Goa. And Ravindra Bhavan, Ravindranath, who said that we should have a country where we don't have to look down, but where our heads can be held high in pride. He invited all these writers, and there were 800 of those writers. They came, and in a single voice, they said to themselves and to the country and the rest of the humanity, do not be afraid. I think the kind of contribution he made to spreading the message of courage in the times when intimidation started becoming the order of the day, that deserves salutes, and I salute you for that. What were these writers saying? If I say that, then it would be as good as saying to you what thoughts Datta Naik has in his heart and in his head for years. The writers were saying that we created a country. So many people sacrificed to bring freedom to us. So many martyrs have laid their lives down, and we created a country which is a country that shall spell out, that shall live, enshrine, and carry forward the legacy of India, the idea of India. And that idea of India is the India which is made by people coming from all parts of the world. The Homo sapien migrating, moving out of Africa, coming to South Asia. The Iranians moving from the West Asia to bring agriculture to India. The Shaks, the Huns, the Greeks, everybody came here, assimilated themselves, and we became a country with diversity. Diversity of religions, diversity of languages, diversity of worldviews. That diversity is at the heart of the idea of India. This was his thought. And that was the thought shared by all those writers involved in the Dakshinan movement. I should add that after the Dakshinayan writers' meeting started taking place in different parts of the country, in Gujarat, Maharashtra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Goa, Karnataka, and so on, at least 28 writers from Karnataka, from Maharashtra, from Goa had to be given police protection. Because in the government department, a list of their names was found as people on target. In other words, every writer who involved herself or himself in this movement risked her or his life for saying simply a simple word, and that was, let there be no fear. Fear not. Just for saying fear not, people had to risk their lives. Datta Naik was in the forefront of that movement. And you can imagine, for a businessman to take such a risk, literally risk his life, stick his neck out, help all these writers with funds, with ideas, and with moral support, was an extraordinary act of love for this nation. He upheld the idea of India, not only in words, but in his action. And it is therefore, Datta Naik, that I value as a great friend, as a great friend. It is not that we meet frequently. Whenever I come to Goa, or when he comes to Karnataka, we meet and exchange a few words. I know about some of his works, literary works. He knows about some of my writings. And yet, somewhere in our hearts, we feel that we are like Sahodaras, born of the same mother. And that mother is the idea of India, for defending which he has risked his life, and yet managed to look very happy and undisturbed. I heard recently that being a socialist, he has views on various matters, including matters which are metaphysical, matters which are social, matters which are material. And on a certain metaphysical matter, when he expressed his view, I was told that some people in this state felt disturbed. You perhaps know about this, and therefore I shall not spell out what I am referring to. He has the courage even to present an idea which is not very popular. I think a writer is a writer not because she or he can write some words on paper. A writer is a writer because the person has the courage to speak to the world what the imagination has captured as the essence of being, essence of the world. I feel happy being in Goa this evening to share the joy of his being 70. I am also happy to be living in India in the times when writers like him, Damodar, Nayantara Sehgal, Ashok Bajpayee, and many others were alive. I do not know what the future will think of the literary works of this generation. But I know for sure that the future will think of these writers with the same degree of respect and reverence as we today think of those writers of medieval times, such as Tukaram, Mira, Kabir, Basava, Akkamadevi. The way we look at the bhakti writers of the past, the future will look at these writers in future, that these were the writers who were alive not just because they produced books, but because they had ideas, and they were willing to give their life if necessary for these ideas. They lived by the ideas, they were ready to die for the ideas. I wish you, Datta Naik, a long future in the company of Mrs. Naik. And I wish for all of you in this audience that Goa keeps producing writers of his caliber and his courage and conviction, so that Goa can set an example for the rest of India. Thank you very much. Bye.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Ganesh Devi. And I now request Sri Vinod Shirsat, eminent Marathi author, chief editor of Sadhana Weekly, editor of Sadhana Prakashan and the digital portal Kartavya Sadhana, to say a few words on this occasion.
नमस्कार. ज्यांचं भाषण ऐकणं ही एक वैचारिक मेजवानी असते, असे गणेश देवी जे आता आपल्या समोर 15 ते 20 मिनिटं बोलले. ज्यांचं भाषण ऐकण्यासाठी, आयडिया ऑफ इंडिया समजून घेण्यासाठी आपण सर्वजण जमलात, ते डॉक्टर शशी थरूर. आणि अर्थातच ज्यांचा गौरव किंवा कौतुक करण्यासाठी आपण इतक्या शांतपणे हा सगळा सोहळा एन्जॉय करताय, असे आदरणीय दत्ता नायक, विचारपीठावरील मान्यवर आणि उपस्थित मित्र हो. 15 मिनिटांचा वेळ मला दिलेला आहे आणि असं सांगण्यात आलं की दत्ता नायक यांचं साहित्य किंवा लेखन याविषयी मी बोलावं. मी माझ्या 15 मिनिटाची विभागणी 10 मिनिटं त्यांच्या साहित्याबद्दल, लेखनाबद्दल आणि पहिले 4 ते 5 मिनिटं आजचं जे औचित्य आहे कार्यक्रमाचं आणि या कार्यक्रमासाठी ज्यांना आपण चीफ गेस्ट म्हणून बोलावलंय ते शशी थरूर, या दोन्हीच्या मुळे माझ्या मनात एक इंटरेस्टिंग योगायोग जुळून आल्याचं दिसतं, तो मी थोडा सांगणार आहे. मी साधारणतः 20 वर्षापूर्वी 2005ला जेव्हा इंग्रजी वृत्तपत्र खऱ्या अर्थाने वाचायला लागलो, तेव्हा द हिंदूमध्ये 2 महनीय व्यक्तींचे कॉलम वाचत होतो अतिशय नियमितपणे. एक रामचंद्र गुहा यांचा पास्ट अँड प्रेझेंट आणि दुसरा शशी थरूर यांचा. त्या कॉलमचं नावच होतं द शशी थरूर कॉलम. आणि अल्टरनेट वीक ते दोघांचे कॉलम असायचे. त्यातला एक कॉलम शशी थरूर यांनी जो लिहिला होता तो 2006च्या मार्चमध्ये, आणि त्यांचा 50शीचा टप्पा त्यावेळी तो संपणार होता आणि त्याचं टायटल होतं इमिनन्स ऑफ इरेलेव्हन्स. आणि तो लेख मला त्यावेळी इतका आवडला होता की त्यानंतर 4-5 महिन्यांनी शशी थरूर जेव्हा युनोच्या सेक्रेटरी पदासाठी निवडणुकीला उभे राहिले जुलै महिन्यामध्ये 2006च्या, त्यावेळी तो लेख, हे शशी थरूर कोण आहे, ते कसा विचार करतात, तो लेख मी 4-5 महिन्यांनी अनुवाद करून साधना साप्ताहिकात प्रसिद्ध केला होता. आणि त्यावेळी मी साधनेचा एक युवा स्तंभ लेखक होतो. मी केलेला तो दुसरा अनुवाद होता. त्या आधी मी केलेला जो अनुवाद होता माझ्या आयुष्यातला पहिला अनुवाद, आणि तोही त्याच्या काही महिने आधी, तो होता जॉर्ज ऑरवेल यांचा व्हाय आय राईट, मी का लिहितो, असा मराठीमध्ये. आणि दुसरा जो अनुवाद होता इमिनन्स ऑफ इरेलेव्हन्स, तर इरेलेव्हन्सचा अर्थ लगेच आपल्याला पटकन कळतो, पण इमिनन्सचा अर्थ मराठीमध्ये शोधण्यासाठी मला बरंच झगडावं लागलं. मी अनुवादक म्हणून तर अगदीच नौखा होतो. तर संदर्भहीनतेच्या उंबरठ्यावर असं त्याचं नंतर शीर्षक केलं होतं. आणि त्यात त्यांनी असं म्हटलं होतं की मी लहान असताना 40शीचा टप्पा मला किती पुढचा वाटत होता, आणि मी जेव्हा 40शीत आलो तेव्हा मला त्याची पुरेशी जाणीव पण नव्हती. आणि 50शीच्या टप्प्यावर त्यांनी असं लिहिलं होतं की खरं तर आत्ता एकूण काळ बदलला आहे, आयुर्मान बदललंय, आणि 50शी ही नवी 40शी आहे, न्यू 40 ही आता 50शी आहे. बरोबर आता जवळपास 18 वर्षे झाली त्या घटनेला, आणि दत्ता नाईक यांचा आपण 70वा वाढदिवस साजरा करतोय. तुम्ही जर त्या शशी थरूर यांच्या लेखातला शेवटचा परिच्छेद जर ऐकला, किंवा मी तुम्हाला आता वाचून पण दाखवेल, तर तुमच्या असं लक्षात येईल की 70 ही आता न्यू 50 आहे. त्यामुळे दत्ता नायक यांच्यासाठी आता ते न्यू 50 मध्ये आहेत असं जर मानलं तर 20 वर्ष आपल्या समोर शिल्लक आहेत. तर मी अगदीच औचित्यभंग होणार नाही आणि गेस्ट आहेत आणि आजच्या उपक्रमाला अतिशय औचित्यपूर्ण होईल म्हणून तो परिच्छेद वाचतो. पन्नाशीच्या टप्प्यावरचा शेवटचा त्यांचा जो परिच्छेद येतो असा. पण मी समाधानी आहे. 50शीचा टप्पा गाठतानाच्या प्रवासात मी काही भ्रामक कल्पनांपासून मुक्त झालो आहे. अनेक लोकांना असं वाटत असतं की त्यांनी सर्व काही पाहिलं आहे आणि त्यांना सर्व काही कळलं आहे. पण त्या रोगाची लागण मला अद्याप झालेली नाही. या जगात शिकण्यासारखं खूप काही आहे आणि करण्यासारखं तर खूपच खूप, याची मला पक्की जाणीव आहे. मी 50शी गाठली आहे, पण माझा असा दृढ विश्वास आहे की हे जग अधिक चांगलं करता येईल. माणसं सुधारू शकतात, स्वतःला आणि इतरांनाही. पुढे पुढे जाण्यासाठी जीवन रोज सकाळी नवीन काहीतरी देऊ इच्छितं. थोडक्यात काय तर मला अनेक प्रश्नांची उत्तरं मिळालेली आहेत, पण अनेक प्रश्नांशी लढणं अद्याप चालू आहे. मी आशा बाळगतो वयाच्या 60तही मला असंच वाटेल. त्यानंतर 18 वर्षे झालेत आणि शशी थरूर यांचा प्रवास जर पाहिला, त्यावेळी ते युनोमध्ये होते, भारतात आले, खासदार झाले, मग मंत्री झाले, काँग्रेसच्या अध्यक्षीय निवडणूक लढवली आणि तेही आणखी 2 वर्षांनी 70च्या टप्प्यावर आहेत. मला अशी खात्री आहे की त्यांना आता आपण न्यू 50 मध्ये आहोत अशा प्रकारची जाणीव असेल. आणि हाच संदेश दत्ता नाईक यांनी घ्यावा आणि गणेश देवी यांच्या बोलण्यातून जो काही संदेश आपल्याला मिळतोय तोही हाच आहे असं मला वाटतं. दत्ता नाईक यांचा माझा संबंध अलीकडच्या 10 वर्षातला आहे, म्हणजे त्यांच्या 60च्या नंतरचा आहे. भेटी आमच्या कमी झाल्या, फोन जास्त झाले, मात्र लेखनाच्या माध्यमातून ते मला खूप जास्त भेटले. म्हणजे त्यांचं मराठीतलं पहिलं पुस्तक थोडं उशिरा आलं. कोकणीमध्ये त्याच्या आधीची जवळपास 30-35 वर्षे ते लिहित होते आणि मराठीत मात्र गेल्या 10 वर्षांमध्ये. मराठीतलं त्यांचं लेखन साधनामधून बरेच वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारचं आहे, परंतु जास्त चर्चेला गेलं, नावाजलं गेलं, उल्लेखनीय ठरलं आणि ज्याला प्रवास वर्णन या प्रकारातला युनिक म्हणावं असं इके बाना नावाचं त्यांचं जे पुस्तक आलं, त्यामध्ये जवळपास 21 लेख आहेत आणि 21 वेगवेगळ्या देशांना त्यांनी ज्या भेटी दिल्या त्या भेटीचं वर्णन करणारे ते लेख आहेत. तुमच्यापैकी काहींनी वाचले असतील, ज्यांनी वाचलेली नसतील त्यांनी जरूर वाचा. मी तुम्हाला माझ्या 20 वर्षाच्या लेखन आणि संपादन कामातून सांगतो की प्रवास वर्णन हे खरं तर रूढ अर्थाने जे तुमच्या माझ्या मनात असतं ते त्याला चिकटवता येणार नाही ते लेबल. प्रवास वर्णन तुम्ही अशा पद्धतीने लिहा असंही मी कोणाला सांगू शकत नाही, पण प्रवास वर्णन कशा प्रकारची असावीत असं जर मला विचारलं तर मी म्हणेल इके बानामध्ये दत्ता नाईक यांनी लिहिली तशी. ते जेव्हा एखाद्या देशात जातात तेव्हा तिथली मंदिरं, मशिदी, चर्चेस, बीचेस यापुरतं मर्यादित राहत नाहीत. किंबहुना हा भाग त्यांच्या एकूण त्या प्रवासातला 2%, 5% असतो. उरलेला 80, 85, 90% त्यांच्या लेखनातला भाग हा तिथला समाज, तिथलं साहित्य, तिथली संस्कृती, तिथल्या कला, तिथलं समाजकारण, तिथलं राजकारण आणि त्या देशाचा नेमका गाभा काय आहे अशा प्रकारची प्रवास वर्णनं मराठीमध्ये तरी मला स्वतःला पाहायला, वाचायला मिळालेली नाहीत. आणि हे कोणालाही शक्य नाही. उद्या मी प्रवास करायला गेलो आणि अशा प्रकारचं जर करायचं म्हटलं तर ते शक्य नाही. याचं कारण तुमचं व्यक्तिमत्व तसं असायला पाहिजे. आणि जेव्हा जेव्हा व्हर्सेटाईल हा शब्द इंग्लिशमध्ये खूप सातत्याने वापरला जातो आणि त्याला मराठीमध्ये खूप चांगला शब्द आहे असं मला दिसत नाही, मी गणेश देवी सरांना विचारणार आहे की ज्या शेड्स व्हर्सेटाईल शब्दामधून येतात तेवढ्या मराठीमध्ये कोणत्या शब्दात अष्टपैलू किंवा बहुआयामी असे शब्द वापरले जातात, परंतु त्या शब्दाची ती जी काही नजाकत आहे ती पकडता येत नाही. तर मला वाटतं की दत्ता नायक यांच्याकडे पाहिलं की त्या शब्दाची एक आठवण होते. मात्र एवढंच नाही, त्यांच्या सगळ्या लेखनाच्या मध्ये भाषा हे तर एक खूप महत्वाचं मूल्य आहेच. अतिशय थेट, कसल्याही प्रकारचा गोंधळ नाही, पूर्णतः क्लॅरिटी आहे मांडणीमध्ये, वाक्यरचनेमध्ये, शब्दांच्या निवडीमध्ये. एकही शब्द त्यांच्या लेखनातला मला मागच्या 10 वर्षात कधीही एडिट करावा लागला नाही. पण केवळ भाषा नाही, त्याच्यातली जी वैचारिक क्लॅरिटी आहे, जी स्पष्टता आहे, मला असं वाटतं की ती सुद्धा अतिशय दुर्मिळ या प्रकारातली आहे. ती स्पष्टता त्यांच्या जगण्यातून आली, त्यांच्या व्यक्तिमत्वातून आली, प्रवासातून आली. परंतु ह्या सर्वाचा बेस मला वाटतं की ते गणित आणि अर्थशास्त्र ह्या दोनही विषयांच्या मध्ये त्यांचं जे काही शिक्षण झालं पदवीचं, तिथे कुठेतरी त्याला एक अधिक चालना मिळालेली असावी. त्याची मुळं त्यांच्या तारुण्यात आणि बालपणात असणारच असणार. पण गणिताचा माणूस ही पण एक त्यांची ओळख या सगळ्या लेखनातून मला पुन्हा पुन्हा प्रकर्षाने जाणवलेली आहे. त्यांचं दुसरं पुस्तक ज्याच्याबद्दल त्यांनी असं म्हटलंय की माझा विचाराचा गाभा यात येऊन गेलाय, ते म्हणजे एका नास्तिकाचा देव्हारा. ते मूळ कोकणीमध्ये आहे, मराठीमध्ये त्याचा अनुवाद झालाय. त्या पुस्तकामध्ये मी नास्तिक का आहे याबद्दल ते खूप सांगतायत, परंतु त्याच्यामध्ये काहीतरी आत्मप्रौढी मिरवणं असं नाहीये. एवढंच नाही तर जे जे लोक नास्तिक आहेत त्यासाठी त्यांनी खूप आकडेवारी दिली, वेगवेगळ्या देशातली, त्यांचं प्रमाण किती आहे. आणि भारतामध्ये ते प्रमाण एका अहवालाच्या आधारे 3% आहे असं त्यांनी सांगितलंय. आणि म्हणून त्यांचा खूप असा एक आग्रह आहे की अशा नास्तिक लोकांनी मी नास्तिक कसा झालो याबद्दल लिहिलं पाहिजे, लोकांच्या समोर आणलं पाहिजे. तसं झालं तर धर्माच्या नावाखाली सर्वाधिक धर्मांध वृत्ती आपलं समाज जीवन नासवण्याचं जे काम करतात त्यांना एक वेगळ्या प्रकारे छेद दिल्यासारखं होईल. त्यांना गप्प करण्यासाठी किंवा त्यांना शांत करण्यासाठी, त्यांची धार ही बोथट करण्यासाठी ते फार उपयुक्त ठरेल असं त्यांचं म्हणणं आहे. आणि नास्तिक कोणालाही होता येत नाही. नास्तिक होणं हा एक वैचारिक प्रवास आहे. अशी कितीतरी वाक्य त्यांच्या ज्या लेखनातून आलेली आहेत ती अफलातून आहेत. म्हणजे प्रत्येक लेख जर काढला तर त्याच्यातून एक सुभाषित वजा, खरं तर सुभाषित म्हटलं की थोडं फ्लावरी लँग्वेज, काहीतरी ग्लोरिफाय केलेलं असतं, थोडं वास्तवापासून भरकटलेलं असतं, असं अनेक वेळा जाणवतं. पण यांची अशी अनेक विधानं ही तुम्हाला उलट तुमच्या सभोवताली असलेलं सिंपल ट्रूथ, की ज्याकडे आपलं फारसं लक्ष गेलेलं नाही, ते क्रिस्टलाइज होऊन अतिशय नेमकेपणाने 1 वाक्यात किंवा 2 वाक्यात 3 वाक्यात ते आणून ठेवतात. आणि मग कधीतरी सहज ते सांगून जातात की मला बौद्धिकतेपेक्षा शहाणपण जास्त महत्वाचं वाटतं. आणि बुद्धिमान माणसं, बुद्धिप्रामाण्यवादी माणसं शहाणी असतीलच असं नाही, या लाईनवरती थोडं विवेचन करतात. आणि मग आपण पुन्हा एकदा जरा खडबडून जागे होतो. एरिक फ्रॉमच्या द सेन सोसायटी या पुस्तकाचाही त्यांनी उल्लेख केलेला आहे. ते पुस्तक मी पण फार पूर्वी जेव्हा वाचलं तर मला त्यातून एक खूप चांगला संदेश माझ्या आयुष्याच्या उमेदीच्या काळात जो मिळाला होता आणि जो त्यावेळचे लोकसत्तेचे संपादक अरुण टिकेकर यांनी त्यांच्या एका लेखामध्ये खूप चांगला पकडला होता. 1956चं ते मूळ पुस्तक आहे, इंग्रजी. आणि टिकेकरांनी असं म्हटलं होतं की त्या पुस्तकाच्या बद्दल लिहून 21व्या शतकासाठी योग्य विचार प्रणाली कोणती या प्रश्नाचं उत्तर त्या पुस्तकामध्ये मिळतं 1956च्या. आणि त्यांनी काढलेला जो धागा होता की 21व्या शतकासाठी योग्य विचार प्रणाली कोणती, ते होतं उदारमतवादाचा पुरस्कार करणारा लोकशाही समाजवाद. मला स्वतःला तेव्हा असं वाटलं होतं, साधारणतः 17-18 वर्षापूर्वी, की हां, मी जे काही विचार करतोय, मला जे काही वाटतंय, तर आपण कोणत्या बाजूचे आहोत, कोणत्या विचाराचे आहोत, तर हे एका वाक्यामध्ये सांगता येईल. आजही आता आपण 21व्या शतकातलं पाव शतक गेलेलं आहे आणि आपल्या सभोवतालचं राजकारण आणि समाजकारण जेव्हा आपण पाहतो आणि समजा त्या एरिक फ्रॉमचं ते विधान 21व्या शतकासाठी योग्य विचार प्रणाली कोणती, त्याच्यावर जर आपण विचार करायचं ठरवलं तर मला वाटतं यश आणि अपयश त्याचा पुनर्विचार करायची गरज आहे का, ते खरं आहे का, अशी बरीच चर्चा मंथन होऊ शकतं. किंबहुना त्याच्यावरच एक पूर्ण चर्चासत्र होऊ शकेल. आजचा जो आयडिया ऑफ इंडियाचा जो विषय आहे तोही शशी थरूर यांच्याकडून जो आपल्याला येणार आहे तो त्याला काही प्रमाणात तरी बळ देईल असं मला वाटतं. दत्ता नाईक यांची जी भाषा आहे त्याबद्दल मी बोललो, पण एकाच वेळी तुम्ही कोकणी, इंग्रजी आणि मराठी तीनही भाषांच्या मध्ये ज्या सहजतेने वावरता ते पाहिलं तर मला जास्त आश्चर्य वाटतं. म्हणजे इंग्रजीचा मला सराव आहे, मराठी तर माझी मातृभाषाच आहे, पण कोकणी मधली त्यांची काही पुस्तकं मी जेव्हा मागच्या 1 महिनाभरामध्ये चालली, त्यातले काही लेख वाचले. देवनागरीमध्येच असल्यामुळे वाचायला अवघड जात नाही आणि समजायला 50% पेक्षा अधिक भाग तरी कोकणी पुस्तकातला समजतो. आणि एक आपण खूप सातत्याने शब्द वापरतो की एखादी भाषा गोड आहे, पण कोकणीबद्दल मात्र मला खूप तीव्रतेने तसं वाटलं. म्हणजे मला हिंदीबद्दल, इंग्रजीबद्दल गोड भाषा असं कधी फील झालं नाही जे कोकणी वाचताना मला वाटलं होतं. आणि त्यात दत्ता नायक यांची कोकणी. तर असे हे दत्ता नायक 10 वर्षापूर्वी मला भेटले, पण खूप कमी वेळा असं वाटतं की अशी काही माणसं आपल्याला जरा थोडी आधी भेटायला पाहिजे होती. तर मला असं वाटतं की दत्ता नाईक मला 10 नाही तर जर 20 वर्षापूर्वी जर भेटले असते तर कदाचित माझ्या जडणघडणीत, विचार प्रक्रियेत, कार्यपद्धतीमध्ये काही ना काही अधिक एक वेगळा बदल झाला असता. त्यामुळे मी अशी आता आशा बाळगतो की पुढचे 20 वर्षे ते कार्यक्षम पद्धतीने जगणार आहेत आणि सगळे समाजवादी आणि पुरोगामी यांचे अनेक मर्यादा असतील तरी यांना दीर्घायुष्य मात्र मिळतं. 90पर्यंत अतिशय ठणठणीत पद्धतीने सगळी माणसं जगतात, कार्यरत राहतात. पुढची 20 वर्ष त्यांनी कार्यरत राहावं अशा प्रकारच्या सदिच्छा देतो. आणि त्यासाठी त्यांच्या पाठीमागे बरीच जास्त कामं आहेत. परंतु आम्ही अलीकडेच 6 महिन्यापूर्वी साधना ट्रस्टसाठी, साधनाच्या विश्वस्त मंडळासाठी 3 वेगवेगळ्या क्षेत्रातले जे सल्लागार आम्ही आमंत्रित केले, त्यांना विनंती केली की तुम्ही आम्हाला पुढची काही वर्ष, 3 वर्ष, 5 वर्ष तरी साधनाच्या बोर्ड ऑफ ट्रस्टसाठी सल्लागार म्हणून योगदान द्यावं. त्यामध्ये आम्ही त्यांनाही विनंती केली आणि त्यांनी मान्य केली. त्यामुळे त्यांचा आणि माझा, त्यांचा आणि साधनेचा आणि अर्थातच साधनाचा आणि तुम्हा सर्वांचा जास्त परिचय पुढच्या काळात होईल. आणि काल आणि आज मी इथे तुमच्या दत्ता नायक आणि तुमचे सगळे अनेक मित्र यांच्याशी जे बोलणं झालं त्यातून एक जुनी कल्पना 2012-13 साली मनात होती, परंतु ती वेगवेगळ्या कारणाने मागे पडली. ती मात्र आता प्रत्यक्षात येईल असं दिसतंय. ती अशी होती की 2011 आणि 12ला आम्ही मराठवाडा विशेषांक आणि विदर्भ विशेषांक काढले होते. आणि त्यानंतर आम्ही कोकणवरचा एक विशेषांक आणि गोव्यावरचा एक विशेषांक, चांगला 80 ते 100 पानांचा, आणि पर्यटकांसाठी नाही तर तुमच्या आमच्यासाठी अशा प्रकारचा तो विशेषांक. तर ते मागे पडलेलं काम आता आगामी वर्षभरात मार्गी लागेल. एक विशेषांक कोकणीवर आणि एक गोव्यावर. आणि कोकणी विशेषांकासाठी तर गणेश देवींनी खास आग्रहाने शिफारस केलेली आहे की हा प्राधान्याने यावा. तर पुढच्या आगामी वर्षभरात आपण या दोनही विशेषांकाच्या निमित्ताने गोव्यामध्ये भेटू. सर्वांना धन्यवाद आणि दत्ता नाईक यांना लाख लाख शुभेच्छा.
Thank you, Vinodji. Shri Avadut Timlo, eminent industrialist, chairman of Pimento Group, has been Datta Naik's long-time friend. I request him to please say a few words about Datta.
दत्ता, एक सांग, तुझं जन्मदिन काय वाढदिवस? इन गोवा वी से वाढदिवस मीन्स द डे ऑफ ग्रोथ. जन्मदिन हो नॉर्दर्न शब्द आसा पयल्यान आयला, डे ऑफ बर्थ. सो आय विल एक्सेप्ट इट एज वाढदिवस. वाड जाता आनी सत्तराच्यान मुखार वाड जावपाची जी आसा ती चड जातली. डॉक्टर देवी आनी बाकीच्या स्पिकरान बरें म्हणलां. आनी आज आमी हांगा रावल्या उबे आयडिया ऑफ इंडिया आयकुपाक शशी थरूरा कडल्यान. म्हणून म्हाका 10 मिनटां दिल्या ती भरपूर पुरो. दत्ता आनी हांव एक नांवाचे, पूण नांव जेन्ना आमकां दवरिल्लें तेन्ना आमकां खबर नाशिल्लें आमी कोण म्हणटा तें. म्हज्या आज्याचें नांव दत्ता आनी तो जेन्ना गेलो हांव जल्मा आयलो आनी म्हजें नांव अवधूत म्हणून दवरलें. तें दत्ताचें नांव न्ही. आमी एका गांवचे, मडगांवचे. आमी मडगांवकार, आमी गोंयकार. दत्ता जर विचारलें तूं मडगांवकार चड काय गोंयकार चड, हें आतां मुखार ओपन जातलें आनी आमी आमगेल्या एमिनंट स्पिकरा कडल्यानूय आयकुचें पडटलें, डॉक्टर देवी कडल्यानूय आयकलें आयडिया ऑफ इंडिया. पूण म्हाका खबर केन्ना आयडिया ऑफ मडगांव कळना आनी आयडिया ऑफ गोवाय कळना. सरळ प्रमोट डबल ट्रिबल प्रमोशन घेवन आयडिया ऑफ इंडिया शिकया पयलीं. जाता तूं म्हज्या धाकटी भावा बरोबर कॉलेजीन आशिल्लो. तेजें नांव प्रशांत तिमलो. प्रशांतान म्हाका सांगलें तो शशी थरूरान दुसरे क्लासीक आशिल्लो म्हणून स्कुलाक, एमपी स्कुलाक. So my brother knew you earlier, my brother knew him earlier, and he also had other people in his class who were eminent. Praful Patel for one. But all of you are in some shadow, because when he went abroad, his classmate and friend was Steve Jobs. So it's just a lighter side that you are in good company of very eminent people. But today is a special day, not about Dr. Devi or Shashi Tharoor or other speakers. It's about you. Can English ek म्हण आसा, instead of Muhammad going to the mountain, mountain has come to Muhammad. So people, mountains have come to greet you at this occasion. You need not walk. आणि एक पोर्तुगीजीन म्हण आसा, यू हॅव रिटन बुक्स इन मराठी, यू हॅव रिटन बुक्स इन कोंकणी, यू हॅव रिटन बुक्स इन इंग्लिश. आय एम वेटिंग फॉर यू टू रायट इन पोर्तुगीज, बिकॉज यू आर बोर्न अ पोर्तुगीज, सो वॉज आय. एंड देन आनी पोर्तुगीजीन एक म्हण आसा, ग्रांदी ओम दे पिकेन तेर्रा म्हणून. म्हणजे दत्त व्हडलो मनीस पूण गोंय ल्हान. दत्ता तूं व्हडलो जालाच पूण गोंयचे खातीर आमकां कितें करपाक जाय. आमी केन्नाय मेळटा तेन्ना दोतोर फ्रांसीस स्कुलाक वचून म्हणटात, अरे गोंय खंय पावलां, गोंय खंय पावलां आनी गोंय खंय पावतलें. पूण हो विचार तुगेलो आसा तो मुखार व्हरपाक जाय, कित्याक तुजे विशयी म्हाका आनी एक एडिटरान प्रश्न मांडून दिल्ले, प्लीज म्हणून दत्ता विचार, कित्याक तो भाशण करतलो आनी त्या प्रश्नाचें उत्तर मातशें पळय दिवपाक शकता जाल्यार. What made you join your family business? Number one, I believe you are taking keen interest in farming. Tell us something about it. तू शेतकरी जावपाक सोदता? You have certain plans to give to the society. Share your views. You are a voracious reader, and I would add to it, prolific writer. Tell us about your reading. I know talking to you, whether it is Ayn Rand or Yuval Harari, we go on exchanging notes. You have written in Konkani, English and Marathi. What makes you write? How do you think? You have traveled throughout India and abroad. We would like to know about your travels. Just 2 weeks ago you went to Morocco. आनी थंयच्यान म्हाका धाडटा फोटोग्राफ धाडटा वॉट्सॅपाचेर. तर हांवें सांगता अरे म्हाका एक इतिहासांतलो एक वर्ल्ड ट्रॅव्हलराची मेन्शन केल्ली याद येता, इबन बतुता म्हणून. तो मोरोको साकून इंडिया आयलो, इंडिया साकून सावथाक गेलो, अरेबिया गेलो आनी तो प्रवास धाडटा अजून कंप्लीट दवरता. तातूंत एक म्हण आसा इंग्लिशेन, रिडींग मेक्स अ मॅन and traveling makes him perfect. You have strong political convictions. Why have you not entered electoral politics? This is a advice given by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to Arvind Kejriwal. Don't stand there out in the Maidan and start telling us, enter politics. And he entered. And it has made some change to the scene, you know. He's a fighter. Right. So that kind of fighting is needed, otherwise there's too much of congregation in a few hands or one hand, and that needs to be diffused. And most importantly, Datta, what are your future plans? 70 years young is just a beginning. Now, a little bit my conclusion on Datta as an entrepreneur and Datta as a literary person. May I say, Datta, if you had truckloads of money, you would not be in business. You would finance your literary pursuits with that capital. And I think you are in business to pursue, if I may put it in a different manner, the Lakshmi is needed to pursue the goals of Saraswati. I would say reluctant businessman, that is Datta. That business keeps him alive, so he doesn't have to pass the hat around to collect for his own journey and forays into literary world. But as Dr. Devi said, the literary fervor takes over and business takes a beating. And Datta is not afraid of that. That's the courage. You are aware, Datta, because you are born in the era of our economic freedom in Goa, wherein it was, we enjoyed tax holidays, we enjoyed freedom to do business, but we did not possess political freedom. 1961, we got our political, 1962, we got our political freedom, but dare I say that we lost economic freedom, which came to us in bits and pieces starting from 1991. Portugal also had economic freedom and did not get it until 1974, the political freedom. China got its economic freedom in 1979 when Deng Xiaoping began the journey into capitalism. And still yet to arrive at minimum requirement of a political freedom. But if we turn the clock back, Datta's family is in education also. A lot of Marathi schools owe their existence to his parental enterprise. And sometimes I wonder, when we had to study Marathi in the 19th century, and we learnt it because Konkani was rather suppressed. So we had an exit into Marathi, and we learnt it on hide and seek basis. But later on, after 1910 in Goa, Marathi schools were permitted with all the freedom that we received from the administrators. And that's how the Marathi schools came into existence, and we have reconnected with the geography of our and patriotism of India. So in that era, so we are dancing between freedom, economic, political, and right now, sometimes you feel, is there an emergency, unwritten emergency or not? And but it is getting diluted. Which direction we are taking on the economic front and political front, that is a long debate that Datta and I will continue to have for years together. And may I wish him good years, so that when I meet him, I can also say, I get my good years. Datta, from 72 to 80 and beyond, all the best and good health to you.
Thank you, Odud Bab. Senior Advocate Cleofat Almeida Coutinho, President of the Goa Unit of Dakshinang Abhiyan, is a very close friend and confidant of Datta Naik. Now we shall hear from him.
Honorable Dr. Felicitation, Datta, Sushanta, Dr. Devi, Odud Bab, Vinod Sirsat, Dr. Kulaso, eminent members in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. After Dr. Devi, Vinod Sirsat and Odud Bab, and before we hear Shashi Tharoor on the idea of India, I have to add my 2 bits. Why this felicitation at all? This was one question. In the beginning, Dilip said, it is not a felicitation. It is celebration of progressive thoughts and ideas which Datta has been pioneering for over 3 decades now. We passed through difficult times. The atmosphere in the country is not very good. There is a lot of hate, intolerance. Datta Naik, as a prominent businessman and a Sahitya Academy awardee, people listen to him. His words carry weight. And he has been using that to bring some sanity in society, trying hard to bring some value system. And I take it that he has played the role of a conscience keeper, and we owe to him this felicitation. I know Dilip said a close confidant, and I also understand that the Satan must not be idolized by his own devils. But then certain jobs had to be done. Datta is a great swimmer, but he wants to swim against the tide. He joined college in the 70s. I thought we were pioneers of student movement in the 80s. But I was told he started it in 70s. And when we were active, he was in Rampongar movement. He was with the Zuari Agro pollution agitation and has been making his mark in the social field. Some days back he gave an interview where he said that this government is absolutely corrupt. The MLAs are looting us. Now to hear this from a businessman, that too in real estate, where if he cannot be a sycophant, at least he was expected to keep quiet. In 2019, Rahul Bajaj said, in presence of Amit Shah, that the atmosphere in this country is no good, that the press is being suppressed and dissent is stifled. He was trolled. And I remember our chief guest Shashi Tharoor writing a column in The Print where he said we require a new India where Rahul Bajaj can invest and at the same time talk fearlessly. I think Datta is in that mold, and he is our own Rahul Bajaj. As Odud Bab said, big man in a small state. A perennial dissenter who calls spade a spade and sometimes overdoes it. We know the controversy a few days back. But then, whether it is the government, his own family, friends, he is known to ruffle feathers. What I appreciate is the courage of conviction. And I will give 2 examples. He comes from a Konkani background, a Sahitya Academy awardee, very pickled in the Konkani movement. In 2011, he stood with the government when it came to the government policy on the medium of instruction. His own friends did not like this. Friends who were otherwise protagonists of Konkani felt otherwise, but his principle was that English cannot be cornered by a few, and the protection of Konkani cannot be left on the shoulders of the poor. I am not talking on merit of the issue. Last year, when it came to the Roman script, most of his friends were on the other side. He took a stand as to diversity in our country, and the Konkani in Roman script must also be accepted. The issue is not I am not talking of the merit. I am only talking of the courage of conviction to take a stand firm on it, and a very clear gumption to stand by it. That is Datta. I do not want to go into the number of movements that have been led. Dakshinayan Ganesh Devi has already told us, we had Lok Shakti during the heydays of Parikar, which finally led to the collapse of the government. We had Samta Andolan, Samajik Parishads organized in Goa. We had a national convention of Dakshinayan, all carried his name, his face, and also his finance. There is a human side to him also. Some time back, when the red light area at Baina was cleared, in a most inhuman condition, he stood with the women there, got arrested, got his factory raided, but still did not give up. In politics, he unseated an MLA in the 80s, but as Avudbab has just pointed out, that he did not enter the political arena. I think there, in that area, he develops cold feet. Because I know there was a great opportunity when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. In 2019, the first offer came to him, but possibly he felt that as an atheist, as a person who takes uncompromising stands, as a perennial dissenter, people will not be with him. That is possibly, he looks at it, I don't know, let us listen to him. This hall is ready in this form due to a donation of 1 crore given by him many years back. Sometime back, he announced another 1 crore for the Konkani Bhasha Mandal. He has announced a new trust where the corpus would go up to 5 crores. Now these are his philanthropic activities. Datta has crossed 70, but is not showing any signs of slowing down. Sometime back, before his birthday, which is on 30th, he published 3 books. After his birthday, another 3 books. He launched his own channel, Datta Naik Speaks. And some time back, when an issue came up at Fatorpa temple where Muslim traders were to be disallowed at the Jatra, he lent his shoulders to fire the first shot. I think, as I've started earlier, he has played the role of a conscience keeper, and all of you attending here today, this felicitation function, I think we have paid our debt to him. We wish him all the best in his future endeavors. He has already told us that in the next 10 years, he is going to make a lot of money. He is going to invest that money in social field also. And he is going to be the voice of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleobab. Now we come to the actual felicitation, the main event of today's program. As part of the felicitation, the committee has decided to present a citation to Mr. Datta Naik. And before the actual felicitation, I call upon Dr. Babita Angle to do the reading of the citation before you.
Citation to Shri Datta Damodar Naik. Dear Datta Bab, we heartily congratulate you on the completion of 70 remarkable years of your life, a lifetime embellished with achievements in a multitude of areas. As a student and a teacher, as an activist and an entrepreneur, as an author and a columnist, as a Konkani crusader and a Marathi writer, as a weaver of tales and a traveler through cultures, your accomplishments are proof of your versatility and genius. You have been a beacon of rational thought and logical reasoning for Goan society, especially the youth. Your illustrious career as an entrepreneur, business person, and industrialist began when you joined the family business in 1975. Your professional acumen is evident from the presence of the KD Naik group in different verticals including farming, food processing, retail, logistics, and housing. You've been duly recognized as a business leader at various fora. At the same time, you have contributed significantly to the welfare of the community, especially the underprivileged, by your philanthropy, much of it anonymous. The launch of Fountainhead Charitable Trust is a culmination of your unwavering commitment to charity. You were an exemplary student during your school and college years, and you have continued to be a student ever since. You've also been an excellent teacher, a management guru from whom many young entrepreneurs have gathered wisdom and received guidance. You were the founder of the first student organization in Goa and have been associated with and led numerous social, cultural, educational organizations. For 50 years, you have been active in the literary and socio-political field of Goa and are known to be a staunch rationalist, secular, liberal, and progressive thinker. Your oratorial skills are sought after for your enlightening and inspiring speeches, which exhibit an inimitable sense of humor. Your columns in Konkani, Marathi dailies, and periodicals have been extremely popular. Your prowess as an author is unparalleled. You have authored books in Konkani, Marathi, and English, straddling different genres, including socio-political studies, travelogues, children's books, novels, belles-lettres, essays, drama, and management and personality development, which have been translated into Marathi, Hindi, Kannada, and English. While your Marathi book, Atma Deepo Bhava, was a bestseller and is currently in its 5th edition, you have been honored with the prestigious National Sahitya Academy Award in 2006 for Jai Kai Zui, an anthology of Konkani essays. Despite being an avowed atheist, your writings on religion and religious topics have struck many a chord. You've been deeply influenced by the teachings of Buddha, and you have studied, practiced, and preached the middle path of Buddhism. You've been outspoken and straightforward, at times risking controversy, but always standing for the truth. Your commitment to honesty and transparency in every sphere of life has earned you countless friends, well-wishers, and admirers. You've stood by your friends through thick and thin, and your ability to empathize with others is a rare quality today. On this significant occasion, we applaud your achievements. Thank you for your contributions to the worlds of literature and business, and extol your commitment to the upliftment of society at large. You are a visionary who has led by example, a man of many talents and a friend beyond compare. We pray that you and your family be blessed with good health and long life, and that you continue to inspire and guide future generations. Margao, Goa, date 5th January 2025. Dr. Francisco Culasso, Advocate Cleophas Almeida Coutinho, conveners, Datta Damodar Naik Felicitation Committee. Thank you for this privilege.
Thank you, Babita. I now request Dr. Shashi Tharoor and all the guests to kindly step down to felicitate our man of the day, Sri Datta Damodar Naik. First, a garland. Then the citation. While the committee was deciding about the gift or a memento to be presented to Datta Bab, Datta, also being a connoisseur of the arts, we decided to present him with a painting. And eminent Goan artist, Dr. Subodh Kerkar, was magnanimous and for being part of this event, it is his painting which is being presented to Datta as a token of all our love and admiration, our respect and affection. Dr. Subodh Kerkar, who requested us that he wanted to say a couple of words about the painting and about Datta Naik, we have acceded to his request, but we have asked him to stick to half a word about the painting and half a word about Datta.
I was told to create something for Datta, which is connected with Goa. And of course, what connects us most is fish. Almost about 50% of my work is connected with the fishermen, the fisherwomen, and the fish markets. And so I decided I will create a fisherman tying a cord. There's a very beautiful poem by Bakibab Borkar. The Yama comes to take him. And he says, no, Yama, no, not today. Today there is very good kingfish for dinner. Come tomorrow. That is the kind of love Goans have for fish. And Datta, in a way, is a fisherman himself, because there is another beautiful poem by Manohar Sardesai. He says, me too am a fisherman. I fish out words from an ink pot and dry them on the sand of paper. So in a way, Datta, as a writer, is also a fisherman. Thank you.
Thank you, Subodh. And now, Dr. Tharoor, please, I won't say too much. It's time for your idea of India.
Thank you very much. Shri Datta Naik, whom we've just honored, Shantaji, Dr. Ganesh Devi, who heads the Dakshinayanan, Shri Vinod Shirsat, Shri Avdat Timblu, my senior at school and classmate of the brother of my classmate, Advocate Cleophas Coutinho, Dr. Francisco Culasso, I think is not, there he is. Other distinguished members of the audience, I know there are too many to mention. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I hope that covers everybody. My greetings to all of you and a very happy new year. It's indeed a pleasure for me to join you this evening in celebrating the 70th birthday of one of Goa's most illustrious sons. Rarely does one come across someone who straddles the worlds of entrepreneurship and literature with such finesse, excelling in each and utilizing them not for personal gain or aggrandizement, but as powerful tools to facilitate social reform. Over the past 5 decades, by dint of his towering business acumen and remarkable literary prowess, which in many ways are knit together by his profound commitment to humanist values, Datta Damodar Naik has forged an industrious legacy. An intellectual beyond compare, he has a grounding in economics and statistics, which he bolstered by obtaining management training from such hallowed institutions as IIM Ahmedabad and IIM Lucknow. In the process, he cultivated an incisive and creative mind that represents a confluence of entrepreneurial zeal and public spiritedness. Naik first forayed into business in 1975 when he joined his family's 6th-generation-old business and perhaps even to his own surprise began blazing an outstanding trail. Once at the helm, he transformed the enterprise into a sprawling conglomerate, its roots spreading out into such diverse sectors as farming, food processing, retail, logistics, and housing. A prolific and prodigiously multilingual writer of fiction and non-fiction alike, Datta Naik has a knack for plumbing the depths of the human condition. Through his works in Konkani, Marathi, and English, which have been widely translated into Hindi as well, he has enriched our nation's intellectual, literary, and public discourse. To my mind, the secular, progressive, and rationalist thrust of his work stems from his love of science and philosophy. In 2006, he won the Sahitya Academy Award for Jai Ki Jui, which is a sterling collection of essays in Konkani, carving a niche for himself in India's Literary Hall of Fame. A redoubtable proponent of civil society leadership, Datta Naik has founded several organizations that undertake social reform and philanthropic projects at the grassroots, striving to uplift some of our weakest fellow citizens. Aside from founding the first student organization of Goa, he's played an outstanding role, a pivotal role in establishing the Goa chapter of the Dakshinayan Abhiyan, and has also been associated with the Samta Andolan and the Lok Shakti. His steadfast participation in all these movements reflects his commitment to creating a more plural, peaceful, and progressive India, brimming, he hopes, as we all do, with justice, fraternity, and egalitarianism. With a heart full of compassion and an unwavering faith in humanist values, Datta Naik has presided over such vigorous organizations as this one, the Gomanth Vidya Niketan, and the Samaj Seva Sangh, through which he has sought to preserve and promote Goa's immensely rich cultural and intellectual heritage, hoping to ensure that it's not only protected but celebrated. Ultimately, underpinning all of his avatars, the philanthropic businessman, the secular and rationalist writer, the public-spirited and tireless social reformer, is the fact of his being a devoted congressman. In fact, I'd argue that his years in the Indian National Congress have buttressed the rationalist within him, enabling him to undertake his other responsibilities with even greater sagacity. After all, to be a member of the Congress is to come face to face with its majestic history, a history of luminaries who not only won India her freedom, but also pioneered the idea of India from which emerged our pluralist and progressive constitution, which we've just celebrated the 75th anniversary of. In my view, there's no better way of honoring a patriotic, democratic-minded, secular, and rational Indian like Datta Naik than by reflecting on this idea of India, which I'm sure animates him and has spurred him on, as Ganesh Devi said, from success to success throughout his splendid years of public service. You've asked me to say a few words about the painting, but I think the painter himself has done so far more effectively than I could. I did notice the fisherman's hook and was thinking of a metaphor to describe its appropriateness, but I think the painter has captured it perfectly for the writer in Datta Naik, and perhaps also for the spirit of public service through which he has hooked the people of this lovely state. So getting to my topic of the idea of India, the phrase is Rabindranath Tagore's, It is in some form or the other arguably as old as antiquity itself, and numerous are the proofs of our aspiration for cultural unity that appear throughout the history of our civilization. In my book, An Era of Darkness, I've dwelled upon how the notion of Bharatvarsha in the Rig Veda, of a land stretching from the Himalayas to the seas, contained the original territorial idea of India. How the travels of Adi Shankara at the cusp of the 10th century, when he crisscrossed the length and breadth of India, establishing his mutts in Srinagar, Dwarka, Puri, Sringeri, brought to life what the Harvard Indologist Diana Eck described as a sacred geography of India, knit together by countless tracts of pilgrimage. But lest this be viewed as a purely Hindu notion, even Maulana Abul Kalam Azad wrote of how Indian Muslims on the Hajj were all viewed by the Arabs as Hindis, for whether they were Kashmiris or Keralites, Punjabis or Pathans, they were all from Hindustan. Now, while this sentiment is centuries old, it was immortalized in 1905 by an extraordinary young lecturer at the Government College in Lahore. A philosopher, poet, and polyglot, this gentleman was called upon to address a meeting of a patriotic body of Indian students. But with little time to prepare a speech, he chose instead to recite a hymn he'd just written, taking not only his audience in Lahore, but the entire subcontinent by storm, so that in the years thereafter, this hymn became the rallying song of Indian nationalism. Sare Jahan Se Acha, sang Allama Muhammad Iqbal, Hindustan Hamara. And then in the sixth stanza of the Tarana-e-Hind, he stirringly summarized a key element of the idea of India that would be enshrined in the Constitution of India. Mazhab nahi sikhata apas mein bair rakhna, Hindi hai hum, watan hai Hindustan hamara. Now, religion, wrote Iqbal, apparently speaking as much to our polarized age as his own, does not teach us to bear animosity towards one another. We are all Indians, and India is our homeland. Though he himself betrayed this idea later in life, the idea outlived him. He was, after all, recalling an idea of India as a single civilization, straddling a specific geography, a shared history, and countless faiths, languages, ethnicities, and cultures, all harmonized into a dazzling kaleidoscopic whole, an idea that was truly timeless. However, the idea of India as a democratic nation, based on a certain conception of human rights and citizenship, vigorously backed by due process of law and equality before the law, is a relatively recent and strikingly modern idea. Older conceptions of India drew their inspiration from mythology and theology. We also have examples of sabhas and samitis, even the highly sophisticated bhikshu sanghas of the Buddhists, where kingdoms and even empires were run along democratic lines, spanning from the grassroots in the form of panchayats and councils to the royal darbars, where kings and emperors sought the counsel of learned and wise elders. This tradition is important to recall, for it confirms that in ancient India both majority and minority opinions were given due importance in the formulation of public policy. This was no mean feat in a nation and society as heterogeneous as ours, with its numberless socio-religious identities and groups. However, the modern idea of India, despite the mystical influence of Tagore, all these roots we've traced into antiquity, and the spiritual and moral influence of Mahatma Gandhi, is today a robustly secular and constitutional construct, based essentially upon the vision and intellect of our founding fathers, notably, in alphabetical order, Ambedkar, Nehru, and Patel. When, at the stroke of midnight, on 15th August 1947, Nehru heralded the dawn of India's freedom, he proclaimed a tryst with destiny. It was a moment, he said, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends and the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. With these words, he launched India into a remarkable experiment in democratic governance, remarkable in some ways because it was happening at all. India, Winston Churchill had once barked, as merely a geographical expression. It's no more a single country, Churchill said, than the equator. Now, Churchill was rarely right about India, but it's true that no other country in the world embraces the extraordinary mixture of ethnic groups, the profusion of mutually incomprehensible languages, the varieties of topography and culture and climate, the diversity of religions and cultural practices, and the range of levels of economic development that India embraces. And yet India is more than the sum of its contradictions. Merely thinking about our country makes clear the enormity of the challenge of defining what it means to be an Indian. How should one approach this land of snow peaks and tropical jungles, with 22 major languages recognized in the Constitution, 22,000 distinct dialects, including some spoken more widely than Danish or Norwegian or Estonian, and with the world's largest population comprising individuals of every ethnic extraction and practicing every faith known to humanity? How does one gauge a culture which elevated non-violence to an effective moral principle, but whose freedom was born in blood and whose independence still soaks in it? How can one determine the future of an ageless civilization that was the birthplace of 4 major religions, a dozen different traditions of classical dance, 85 major political parties, and 300 ways of cooking the potato? Well, it's often said that any truism about India can be immediately contradicted by another truism about India. Our country's national motto, emblazoned on our governmental crest, is Satyameva Jayate, truth alone triumphs. The question remains, however, whose truth? It's a question to which, in the world's most populous nation, there are 1.4 billion answers. But that sort of answer is no answer at all. And so another answer to those questions has to be sought. And this may lie in a simple insight. The singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural. There are, in the hackneyed phrase, many Indias. Everything exists in countless variants. There is no single standard, no fixed stereotype, no one way of doing things. This pluralism is reflected in the way India arranges its own affairs. All groups, faiths, tastes, ideologies survive and contend for their place in the sun. At a time when most developing countries opted for authoritarian models of governance to promote nation building and drive socio-economic development, India chose to be a multi-party democracy. And despite countless stresses and strains, perils and pressures, including during the emergency when even habeas corpus was suspended, and even during our own difficult times, a multi-party democracy, freewheeling, rumbustious, corrupt and inefficient perhaps, but nonetheless flourishing, India has remained. Now, one result is that India strikes many foreigners as maddening, chaotic, inefficient, and fractious as it muddles its way through the 3rd decade of the 21st century. Another, though, is that India is not just a country. It's an adventure, one in which all avenues are open and everything is possible. India, wrote the British historian E.P. Thompson, is perhaps the most important country for the future of the world. All the convergent influences of the world, he wrote, run through this society. There is not a thought that is being thought in the West or the East that is not active in some Indian mind, unquote. Well, I'm glad a Briton said that and not an Indian. But it's true. The Indian mind has been shaped by remarkably diverse forces: ancient Hindu tradition, myth, scripture, the impact of Islam and Christianity, and 2 centuries of British colonial rule. The result is unique. Many observers abroad have been astonished by India's survival as a pluralist state. But India could hardly have survived as anything else. Pluralism is a reality that emerges from the very nature of our country. It's a choice made inevitable by India's geography and reaffirmed by its history. Now, this means that the idea of India is itself very unusual in today's world. Talking about Indian nationhood to foreign audiences often reminds me of a perhaps apocryphal story of 2 law professors arguing about a particular matter. And one professor says, you know how we can solve this problem? We can do this and this and this and we can solve it. And the other law professor says, yes, that will work in practice, but will it work in theory? And the fact is that Indian nationhood, Indian nationalism works in practice, but it doesn't work in theory. It's not based on language. I mean, all the theories of nationalism, because we have at least 22 or 35 Indian languages, depending on whether you follow the constitution or the ethno-linguists. It's not based on geography, because the natural geography of the subcontinent, framed by the Himalayas and the seas, as I said, was hacked by partition. It's not based on ethnicity, because the Indian accommodates a diversity of ethnic types, in which many Indians have more in common with so-called foreigners ethnically than they have with each other. So Indians have more in common ethnically with Pakistanis and Bangladeshis than they do. I mean, a Punjabi or a Bengali would have more in common with a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi than with a Poonawala or a Bangalorean. So ethnicity is also not the basis of our nationhood. And it's not based on religion either, because we are home to every faith known to mankind. And Hinduism, a faith without a national organization, no established church, no ecclesiastical hierarchy, no Hindu pope, no Hindu Mecca, no uniform beliefs or modes of worship, exemplifies as much our diversity as it does a common cultural heritage. So Indian nationalism is the nationalism of an idea. And you can argue it's the idea of a fantastical ever land, emerging from an ancient civilization, united by a shared history, and sustained by a pluralist democracy under the rule of law. Now, this land imposes no narrow conformities on its citizens. You can be many things and one thing. You can be a good Muslim, a good Keralite, a good Indian, all at once. A good Christian, a good Goan, and a good Indian all at once. I actually, in my years at the UN, part of them was spent dealing with first the crisis and then the civil war in the former Yugoslavia, where Freudians began to note the distinctions that arise out of the narcissism of minor differences, because all these Yugoslavs are busy killing each other, but all descended from the same Slavic tribes that settled the Balkans in the 7th through 11th centuries AD. Now, that's the narcissism of minor differences. In India, we celebrate the commonality of major differences. To turn Michael Ignatieff's famous phrase on its head, we are a land of belonging rather than of blood. So one can argue the idea of India has to be that of a land, one land embracing many. It's the idea that a nation may accommodate, indeed celebrate, differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, conviction, costume, and custom, and still rally around a consensus. And that democratic consensus is around the simple principle that in a democracy, you don't really need to agree all the time, except on the ground rules of how you will disagree. The reason India has survived all the stresses and strains that have beset it for nearly 8 decades, and that led so many abroad to predict our imminent disintegration, is that we maintained consensus on how to manage without consensus. Today, those in positions of power seem to be scorning those ground rules, which are enshrined alongside the idea of India in our Constitution. And that's why it's imperative today more than ever to reaffirm those rules, that idea, and above all, our Constitution. And indeed, it's why I'm writing a short book on the Constitution myself right now, that will be published in May this year. Because I do believe it enshrines this idea of India. It's so vital to us. We celebrated our 77th Independence Day and the 75th anniversary of the adoption of our Constitution recently. Yet even the pomp and pageantry that accompanied these milestones could not paper over some glaring cracks, which have appeared in the fortifications of our constitutional structure and grow wider by the day, rendering the idea of India vulnerable to alarming onslaughts. It has become impossible to escape the perception that increasingly our elections are sustaining only the bare bones, a skeleton of democracy, even as its sinews, our parliament, legislatures, judiciary, news media, civil society, public universities, and watchdog agencies are either hollowed out or hijacked. More pernicious still is the politics of religious hatred, the vigilantism in the name of religion, the villainizing of minorities, and the brazen communalization of our politics, polity, and public life that the Bharatiya Janata Party and its fellow travelers have enabled, and which they so sedulously encourage. Mr. Timblow referred to it as an undeclared emergency. Taken together, these trends represent indeed something like an undeclared emergency, in many ways reflecting our constitution makers' worst fears, and they challenge the idea of India, the cornerstone of our democratic republic. You know, on 25 November 1949, the eve of the adoption of the Constitution, its chief architect and principal draftsman, Dr. Ambedkar, addressed the Constituent Assembly, magisterially summarizing the work of his drafting committee. But before commending its work to the Assembly, he pointedly observed, and I quote, "However good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out bad because those who are called to work it happen to be a bad lot. However bad a constitution may be, it may turn out to be good if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot," quote unquote. The working of the Constitution, Ambedkar pointed out, depended on how the people and the political parties work it, apply it. Constitutions are first and foremost, as Ambedkar explicitly made clear, tools to limit and restrain state power. The challenge lies in reconciling the limitations of state power with a popular mandate, thus preventing temporary majorities, because in a democracy a majority is always temporary, though some people forget that, from completely undoing what the Constitution has provided. It has been suggested that the founders of the Indian Republic held a conception of democracy that went beyond majority rule, that rejected the majoritarian premise, for they were always worried about democracy becoming an elections-only affair, and of a popular mandate degenerating into majoritarianism. They subordinated politics to law. In fact, in the Constituent Assembly, the Prime Minister and Home Minister of that time, Nehru and Patel, went to great lengths to limit their own power, a thought simply unimaginable in their counterparts today. As Ambedkar put it, and as many of us in the opposition have been saying, the rights of Indians cannot be taken away by any legislature merely because it happens to have a majority. These are Ambedkar's actual words. After all, our quest for freedom was not merely a struggle for freedom from colonial subjugation. It was an all-out revolt, symbolized by Gandhian civil disobedience and non-cooperation, against a tyrannical administration of law and order. Thus was born constitutional morality, a phrase that Ambedkar brought into vogue, the legal counterpart of the idea of India, which entails a commitment to constitutional means, to its processes and structures, alongside a commitment to free speech, scrutiny of public action, and legal limitations on the exercise of power. Only if all elected representatives, public servants, and even citizens embrace this constitutional morality could freedom flourish in India. The Founding Fathers knew that with changing circumstances, the aspirations of Indians and the ways in which they could be realized would evolve. So they drafted a transformative constitution, which they equipped for all times to come with the tools that would allow us, in Gandhiji's famous phrase, to wipe every tear from every eye. Over the past decade, however, that constitution and the values it embodies, especially those of liberty, equality, and fraternity, all woven together by secularism, have been threatened. The Constitution's most seminal contribution to the idea of India, that of the primacy of individual liberty and autonomy, and of the individual, the citizen, being the true custodian of the Republic, has been brutalized. Dissent, in particular, has been villainized as anti-national, and dissidents have been charged under draconian anti-terrorism laws, particularly under the UAPA as amended by this government, which have turned the process into the punishment. This ensures that an under trial languishes endlessly in prison before being acquitted, as has occurred in, and you won't believe this, 97% of the cases filed under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, for lack of evidence. So they file cases, there is no evidence, they don't have to bring them to trial, they don't even give them bail. Sometimes people die in prison, but those who don't die eventually are released because in 97% of the cases there is no conviction. But meanwhile they have been punished, they've lost their liberty for years, they've lost their freedom. And in many cases they lose their health, as we lost both Father Stan Swami, an infirm 84-year-old Jesuit priest, and Professor G.N. Sai Baba, a wheelchair user with over 90% disability. Their recent deaths remain a blot on our collective conscience. And what about the young student, Omar Khalid, who spent more than 4 years in jail before getting bail last week, thanks to this draconian law? As for the repressive sedition law, which has not even spared university students shouting slogans over the previous decade in India, all thanks to the loose, colonially motivated wording of the law, the BJP now claims to have jettisoned it by rehauling the Indian Penal Code. But if you take even a cursory glance at Section 152 of the new code, the new decolonized Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, you will see that sedition has merely been split into a series of vaguely defined, stringently punishable offenses. The specter of an authoritarian, vindictive surveillance state thus continues to loom large over India, the undeclared emergency. Also evident is that numerous public-spirited and patriotic Indians have been robbed of the rule of law's protection, not to forget the fundamental rights the Constitution guarantees them, merely because they dared to question and criticize our almighty government. All of this flies in the face of our founding fathers' vision. Let us not forget that our founders, chief among them, as I said, Ambedkar and Nehru, recognized the need to impose a liberal constitution upon a decidedly illiberal society. In line with contemporary liberal thought, they committed India to the universally lauded idiom of the rule of law, constructed a state very centralized in Ambedkar's vision, rejected localism, instituted a model of representation as units for individuals rather than groups. Pursuant to this democratic setup, each and every Indian voter and citizen was supposed to exercise agency in the democratic project and could not find his situation reduced to the pre-existing loyalties of group identity or religious affiliation. The Constitution granted representation not to religion, one's predetermined identity, but to one's individual expression of agency, and that's why the vote was so important. Democratic politics cannot be reduced to the advocacy of preset interests. Instead, interests had to be expressed through politics, and the very construction of one's identity then became a form of freedom. You were not confined to describing yourself by your religion. You could be a socialist, you could be a libertarian, you could be whatever you wanted to be, a Congress party member like Datta Naik, or a BJP member for that matter, and that individuality was what defined you politically, not your religion. And this is why the Constituent Assembly rejected, in a resounding affirmation of the idea of India I've described, separate electorates, weighted representation, reservations on the basis of religion. All these were proposed in the Constituent Assembly. This fundamental difference of opinion on whether religion should be the determinant of Indian nationhood and citizenship continues to haunt our politics. What is CAA but this question indeed? Our nationalist struggle, as you know, split on this question. It was by rejecting two extremist, exclusivist ideas that our founders enshrined in the Constitution, an all-inclusive secular idea of India, which fostered a civic nationalism as against an ethno-nationalism based on religion, language, culture, and ethnicity, ensuring thus that all those who call this land their home are equal citizens with equal rights, irrespective of those other differences. Let us not forget that the two-nation theory, that revolting idea which metamorphosed into Pakistan, was not endorsed by the Muslim League alone. Even the Hindu Mahasabha and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh had long been arguing that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations with irreconcilable historical, religious, and cultural differences, making their coexistence in a united India impossible. Vinayak Savarkar, the father of Hindu nationalism, published his Essentials of Hindutva in 1923. M.S. Golwalkar published We or Our Nationhood Defined in 1939, just a year before he became Sarsang Shadak of the RSS. To date, the RSS provides both the sheath of cultural nationalism to the nakedly communal sword of the BJP and the springboard into public life for numerous votaries of Hindutva. Little wonder then that Prime Minister Narendra Modi and most of his cabinet colleagues started out as young men in the local RSS Shakha, swishing about in white shirts and khaki shorts and brandishing lathis as part of their paramilitary drills, all reflective of Hindutva's reverence for the fascist movements of pre-World War II Europe. So Hindutva, as I have argued, is not only un-Indian, it's un-Hindu. It flies in the face of the sprawling faiths. It's more a conglomerate of countless beliefs and ways of life and worship than a single sort of one God, one prayer book, one religion kind of concept. Hinduism, in fact, can seamlessly coexist with different religions, because it always has believed, as Swami Vivekananda so magnificently articulated, that ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti, that there is only one truth, but our wise have very, very different ways of seeing it. In fact, Swami Vivekananda loved reciting the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, which says that just as many rivers flow, some straight, some winding, some down hills, some down valleys, but end up in the same sea, so also all ways of worship of all religions end up with the same divine. The Hindu might call it Brahman, somebody else may call it God, Jehovah, Allah. It didn't matter. It was all the same thing. That was the fundamental Hindu belief. And this kind of credo is what led Swami Vivekananda to argue that the strength of Hinduism is it not merely tolerated other faiths, it accepted them. That difference between acceptance and tolerance was central to the Hinduism that he preached and, of course, that Gandhiji followed. And I must say that this has made, in many ways, this spirit of inclusiveness and the idea of India possible. It made unity in diversity the most hallowed of modern India's self-defining slogans. In stark contrast, Hindutvavadis envisioned and envision an India where Hindus alone are supreme and where Muslims and Christians can only live on the sufferance of the majority. On the other extreme of the spectrum of religious bigotry, of course, Muhammad Ali Jinnah capitalized on Muslim anxieties about this quest for a Hindu-only India, and intensifying his hate-mongering in the aftershock of the League's poor showing in the provincial elections of 1937, he sought to instill in Muslims a fear of being subjugated by a belligerent Hindu majority once the British departed. That's what led to the Lahore Resolution of 1940, officially demanding Pakistan, which after 45 had driven a decisive, irretrievable nail in the coffin of a united and undivided India. Now, in deference to India's civilizationally capacious character, our greatest patriots, including, of course, led by Mahatma Gandhi, rejected both these extremes, refusing to accept the logic of the pernicious two-nation theory and reaffirming the idea of India I've described to you all. While the demands for a Hindu-only Bharat and a Muslim-only Pakistan were, in their view, unnatural and inorganic, the idea of India, pluralist India, had always existed. In fact, it had been first codified going back to the Motilal Nehru Report of 1928, India's first serious attempt at drafting a constitution of our own, 19 years before independence. Neither the framers of this report, which was drafted by the Indian National Congress and several other parties in committee, nor of the Constitution of India 2 decades later, accepted separate electorates on religious grounds. This is why the Muslim League rejected the Nehru Report. And in the constitutional case, as you know, the League boycotted the meetings of the Assembly and eventually left it. As the constitutional scholar Granville Austin had observed, many of the trailblazing initiatives of the Indian Constitution, including universal adult franchise and unassailable fundamental rights, can be found in this report going back to 1928, a year where our colonizers only just had extended the vote to women in their home island. And as you know, the United States, hailed as the world's oldest modern democracy, did not even grant universal adult suffrage, which we were able to, independent India was able to do in its very first election. They didn't really do it until the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So all of these, frankly, suggest that even as our founding fathers grappled with a succession of cataclysms, this idea of India was always in their mind. Whether it was colonization, the carnage of partition, the arrival in India of countless refugees, the invasion of Kashmir, the unification of the princely states, all of these things happened while the Constitution was being written. But they never abandoned the idea of India. They never forgot the lessons of the Nehru Report, the Karachi Resolution, and of course, when they finally adopted a constitution for India as a sovereign secular republic, they decided it would be a country for everyone, reflecting the very values I've described to you. Pakistan, an Islamic republic, has a constitutional order that strictly has to be consistent with Islam. It is condemned to second-class status its minorities, who are not only discriminated against, their passports are stamped non-Muslim in Pakistan. I've seen Pakistani passports bearing that stamp. almost like the Star of David had to be worn by Jews under Nazi rule. That's what the Pakistani passport is like. We've never been like that. Our founders never accepted the argument that because Pakistan had been created as that kind of country, a so-called homeland for the subcontinent's Muslims, that India should be turned into a Hindu Rashtra, a reflection, a sort of Hindu Pakistan. No, our far-seeing founders came down firmly in support of the idea that being Indian had nothing to do with religion. Everything to do with considering oneself Indian by virtue of birth and upbringing and belonging, a sense of belonging. That's why the title of my book about Indian nationalism is The Battle of Belonging. And whoever considered themselves Indians, they affirmed, were entitled to equal rights and privileges. Article 1 of our Constitution proclaims India to be a union of states. And nowhere, our founding fathers said, in this union was there space for any exclusionary, extremist, or ethno-nationalist state. So they created a pluralist, multi-party democracy where religion was not the determinant of nationhood and citizenship, and all Indians were free to do their own bidding and dream their own dreams. For these dreams they often strove together as comrades in a common cause, and when they succeeded in all their diversity, India triumphed. In the years following independence, the most glowing illustration of this was the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. It broke out when I was still in high school. My final year, just taken my closing exams, and the war broke out. And in a breathtaking display of recklessness, the Pakistani generals declared a jihad on the Hindu unbeliever, only to get trounced by a military led by a Parsi, General Manekshaw, an air force with an assistant chief of air staff who was Muslim, Air Chief Marshal Latif, who went on to become Chief of Air Staff. In East Pakistan, where this liberation war was fought, the general officer in charge of the Eastern Command was a Sikh, Jasjit Singh Arora, and finally the general we helicoptered into Dhaka to negotiate the terms of surrender of the Pakistani army was Jewish, Major General J.F.R. Jacob. That was India. That was the India they were declaring a jihad against. And I've been to the island of Diu, since you're all in Goa, and you have a common colonial history there. You should go, if you haven't already, and look at the memorial to the only ship we lost in that 71 war, the INS Kukri, which sank with all hands on board. Captain Mullah, in command of the ship, went down with the others. At this memorial, they've done something remarkable. They've listed the name of every single Jawan and sailor who died. And as the Kukri went down to its watery grave, you see every religion of India, every region of India represented there as a tangible testament, which brings tears to one's eyes and swells one's heart with pride that nobody has a monopoly on the idea of India, that everyone belonging to every faith in this wonderful country of ours has shed their blood and sacrificed their lives to preserve and protect our future. But for those who claim to try to seek to create a new India, this old idea of India is repugnant. Their conception of an Amrit Kal is premised on India belonging only to people of their faith. The India of 1971, the India of Ambedkar, Nehru, Mahatma Gandhi, to whom Ishwar and Allah were but different names for the same Almighty. And Gandhiji, don't forget, was shot dead for defending the plural and peaceful idea of India. This appalls our ruling party. Petrified of the power of a united people, they have sought to divide us on communal lines. Why else would the ruling party on the campaign trail last year in 24, launch a savage assault on our republic's religious pluralism? Addressing a rally in Rajasthan, the Prime Minister described Muslims as infiltrators and thundered that when the Congress party was last in power, it made Muslims the foremost recipient of India's resources. He declared that the Congress and its allies would snatch away the Hindu majority's hard-earned wealth and give it to Muslims, sparing not even the Mangal Sutras of their mothers and sisters, and adding that they would redistribute wealth to Muslims, described as those who have more children, and even promote Sharia law. Electoral politics aside, this disgraceful scaremongering about 200 million of his fellow citizens, all of whom he is constitutionally pledged to serve, was in keeping with the Hindu chauvinist doctrine the Prime Minister imbibed in his childhood and youth, and which he sadly reflects. And And when the Prime Minister himself leads this reprehensible communal chorus, others, perhaps in a bid to ingratiate themselves with the powers that be, do not remain far behind. Even in some cases, judges and some judges, who are supposed to be the custodians of our rule of law and equality before the law. All of you would be aware that during the recently concluded winter session of Parliament, a motion for the impeachment of a prominent High Court judge was sought to be introduced in both houses. Not only did this sworn defender of justice, upon whom it's incumbent to be fair and just, preside over a communal gathering, he went so far to say at that gathering that India should be run along the wishes of the majority community, and employed a loathsome expletive to refer to our Muslim fellow citizens. And this, mind you, is only the most flagrant instance of a sitting judge vilifying the minority community. Hindutva has always sought to wrest power in the present by waging war after war on the past. The battlefield of history suits them to distract the public, even though exacting revenge on history and reversing historical injustices, both real and imagined, only begets new injustices in the present, punishing those who for no fault of theirs happen to share the historical aggressor's fate. In the process, they denuded of the protection of the idea of India and stripped of their rights as free and equal citizens. Today, across courts in our country, lawsuits are pending that demand the conversion of some mosque or the other to a temple. In fact, not just mosques, even such abodes of spirituality and syncretism as the Ajmer Sharif Dargah have come under attack, with wild claims swirling about their having been built on the ruins of temples. And while the Prime Minister, in an appreciable display of religious eclecticism, has sent a chadar to Ajmer, to Dargah Sharif just yesterday, he has not said a single word against this preposterous demand to turn it back into a temple. In Uttar Pradesh alone, 18 such lawsuits are pending. Coupled with the Supreme Court's reluctance so far to uphold once and for all the Places of Worship Act as sacrosanct and unassailable, the path as of now to a new India, a new Bharat, seems littered with the wreckage of that old and noble idea of India. We have already witnessed a partition in the Indian soil. If this madness continues, we could witness a partition of the Indian soul, which in my view would be no less devastating. At this somber juncture in our nation's journey, we have just mourned the loss of one of modern India's greatest architects, who, having revolutionized our economy by tugging it out of socialist stagnation, recently passed into history, depriving India of one of her last Nehruvian statesmen. Yet it would be remiss of us to eulogize Dr. Manmohan Singh as only an economic liberator, one who redefined the economic idea of India and in so doing lifted millions out of poverty. The fact is that much like Dr. Ambedkar, this Dr. Sahib believed that if India is truly to flourish, equality must not only be political, it must also be economic and social. So he set himself the task as Prime Minister for a decade of expanding the idea of India and drawing its protective socio-economic cover over millions of Indians who till then had woefully resided on the margins of our national consciousness. He pulled 10 million people out of poverty every year. 1 crore crossed that line, the poverty line, which is defined so low in our country. Then, under Dr. Singh's stewardship, we enacted both the Right to Education Act of 2009, bringing a record number of children to school and pumping resources into classrooms, and the Right to Information Act of 2005, which shored up the participatory nature of our democracy, empowered our citizenry, and made public officials more accountable. Not only this, he presided over the opening of millions of new bank accounts, strengthened rural purchasing power through the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, and introduced the Aadhaar scheme that today gives every Indian a digital identity. As he stepped away after years of industrious service in 2014, he left behind an idea of India more vital and vigorous than he had found it. In the fractured and fractious times of today, when hatred, not social transformation, is the recurring theme, his is an example worth following. Standing here before all of you, my heart swells with gratitude for this man who, through his steadfast and selfless service, exhorted every Indian, transforming India in the process. As one who had the invaluable privilege of knowing him and working alongside him, I bow my head in pranam to this truly great soul. And yet, on a day we celebrate the 70th birthday of Datta Naik, I want to say we must not lose hope. Over the past 5 years, democracy and liberty-loving citizens of India have risen to reclaim our republic. Rescuing the Constitution of India from the highbrow preserves of courtrooms, legal chambers, and academia, they have mobilized it and sent it to battle. In the biting cold of December 2019 and early 2020, before COVID, lakhs of Indians across the country, youngsters, students, old, feeble, yet indomitable women of Shaheen Bagh, poured into the streets in protest against the sickening Citizenship Amendment Act and National Register of Citizens, which, when read together, gave color to the two-nation theory by excluding Muslims alone from fast-track citizenship for citizens of neighboring countries. Even though the state cracked down hard on them, storming the universities of peacefully protesting students, assaulting them, and even though over 60 people have died in the ensuing violence in Delhi alone the following year, the foot soldiers of our Constitution never gave up. On those freezing nights, wrapped in fog, countless Indians of all faiths and castes, speaking numerous languages, held aloft portraits of Ambedkar, Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, chanted the preamble in unison as one people. And as the electrifying cry of "We the People" ripped through the darkness, the idea of India roared back to life, revitalizing our republic and promising to awaken us into that heaven of freedom that Tagore so memorably wrote about. So if there's one thing you take away from this felicitation of Dr. Datta Naik, let it be this, that the idea of India, as is his idea of India, was, is, and forever shall be a labor of love. It demands toil. It demands incessant striving. It demands a resolve of steel. And above all, it demands that we never forget a simple fact. It was only after enduring over a century of unimaginable horrors and brutalities, trials and tribulations, that we gained freedom and began scripting our nation's destiny with our own hands. We transformed India from an immeasurably impoverished, illiterate, and sometimes most baffling democracy into the world's most astonishing, most diverse, most plural land. While momentous and majestic, this is not an achievement we can ever take for granted. We must always remain vigilant, watching out for dangers to our democratic and secular well-being, and shouldering sincerely the duties of citizenship. Because ultimately the founders of modern India, who undertook the greatest constitutional enterprise, perhaps since the one in Philadelphia in 1787, bequeathed this eternal land and the idea of India not to politicians. They bequeathed it to the citizens of India, to you and us, me, all of us here, making us all the custodians of this rumbustious and resilient republic. With these words, I'd like to join you all in wishing Dr. Datta Naik a wonderful 70th and many more decades of service to follow. Thank you so much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for a really, truly inspirational speech. I can assure you that all those who have listened to you today will never give up hope. But, ladies and gentlemen, like all good things, Dr. Shashi Tharoor's speech should also come to an end, must also come to an end. But we have another good thing coming up, and I request Datta to please address the gathering which has come to felicitate you today.
माचे वयले सगळे मानेस, माचे फुडले सगळे मानेस, भावांनो आनी भयणी, ह्या सभाघरांत उटंगाराचो पावस पडचो अशें म्हाका दिसता. I wish it rains cats and dogs in this auditorium. It was Charlie Chaplin who said, I always like rain because nobody can see me cry. I feel, sir, first in tears. म्हाका मनसोक्त रडन अशें दिसता. दुखां हें सगळ्यांत व्हडलें तीर्थ अशें हांव मानतां. म्हज्या एका दोळ्यांत आनंदाचें दूख आसा जाल्यार दुसऱ्या दोळ्यांत दुःखाचें दूख आसता. आनंद अशे खातीर ज्या आपुलकीन ज्या आपलेपणान तुवें म्हजो सत्कार केलो ताणें हांव सद्गतीच जालां. म्हाका लॉर्ड्सा वयलो सौरभ गांगुली याद जाता. लॉर्ड्स जिखले तेन्ना शर्ट काडलो तसो काडचो काय दिसता, इतलो आनंद म्हाका जाला. दुसरे दोळ्यान दुःखाचें दूख आसा, कित्याक हो सुवाळो पळोवपाक म्हजो बापूय, म्हजी आवय, म्हजी प्रिय व्हडली भयण मिनाक्षी दिदी, म्हजो भावोजी भाई केणी, म्हजे कितलेशेच प्रतिशेश जाल्ले इश्ट आनी सोयरे हांगा नात म्हणून म्हाका खंत जाता. You know, when I was studying in IIM Ahmedabad, a learned professor told me, Mr. Naik, when you want to say yes, don't say no. Are you with me? म्हणजे तुका जेन्ना पळय हय म्हणपा जाय तेन्ना ना म्हणनाका. I said, sir, I'm with you, but can I add something? Go ahead. Sir, you should not say no when you want to say yes. तुमकां जेन्ना हय म्हणपा जाय तेन्ना ना म्हणनाका. म्हणजे हे म्हजे फ्रेंड जेन्ना आयले तुजो सत्कार करता, हांव नाका नाका म्हणलें ना. अति नम्रताय हें एक अहंकाराचेंच रूप अशें हांव समजता. अति नम्र नाका नाका म्हाका नाका गो. बिकॉज I may sound snobbish, sir. आत्मप्रौढी सांगता अशें दिसत, but I truly deserve this felicitation. Because you are not felicitating person called Datta Naik, you are felicitating child of Goan Renaissance. You are felicitating child of time, modern time. You are felicitating a conviction, a philosophy, values. त्या खातीर म्हाका I deserved, because not me, this thought, this conviction deserves this felicitation. म्हज्या आजच्या भाशणाचे 3 वाटे आसात. पयल्या वाट्यान हांव कृतज्ञताय उक्तावंक सोदतां. दुसऱ्या वाट्यान हांव क्षमा मागपाक सोदतां आनी क्षमा करपाक सोदतां. आनी तिसऱ्या वाट्यान म्हज्या जिणेच्या तत्वज्ञाना विशीं थोडें सांगपाक सोदतां. हांवें सदांच म्हज्या बापाय विशीं कडूसाणेन बरयलां किंवा उलयलां. आज म्हजो बापूय दामोदर काशीनाथ नायक हाज्या म्हज्या जिणेंतल्या सकारात्मक योगदाना विशीं म्हाका सांगपाक जाय. 1935 ते 1985 50 वर्सां अखंड म्हज्या बापायन घास मारून धंदो केलो. आज ताजे हांव खांद्यार आसां म्हणून गिरेस्त म्हणून वावरता. वॉट एवर आय एम, आय ओ टू माय मदर. म्हजी आवय हो एक भरिल्लो कोळसो आसलो. तिणें म्हजेर म्हाका प्रागतीक संस्कार दिले. तिणें म्हाका सांगलें, मूल्यहीन सुखासीन वृत्ती ही सुदृढ जिणेची बुन्याद जावपाक शकना. लक्षांत घेयात, मूल्यहीन सुखासीन वृत्ती ही सुदृढ जिणेची बुन्याद जावपाक शकना. To borrow Wordsworth's words, what he said towards his sister Dorothy, I may say, she gave me eyes, she gave me ears, she gave me heart, she gave me fears, she gave me sweet fountain of life. जिणेच्या आनंदाच्या झऱ्याचें वजऱ्याचें कारंजें तिणें म्हज्या काळजांत रोयलें. म्हज्यो 3 भयणी, मिनाक्षी, शकू आनी तिसरी भयण जी म्हजी बापोल भयण वेला, जिका हांव भयणूच मानता. 3 भयणी, म्हजे भावोजी भाई केणी आनी दोतोर दिवाकर लोलयेकार हे म्हज्या जिणेच्या बऱ्या वायट प्रसंगात म्हज्या फाटल्यान रावले. तांचो मोग हांव केन्नाच विसरपाक शकना. म्हजी घरकान्न सुशांता ही म्हजी फक्त घरकान्न न्ही, म्हजी सखी, प्रिया, मैत्रीण, नर्स, दोतोर, समुपदेशक. जिणे 2 फाटी अशें जालें की हांव मरतां काय वाचतां. ह्या वेळार सुशांतान जी म्हजी सेवा केल्या ती हांव विसरूंक शकना. म्हजे 2 पूत, म्हजे 2 धुवो, दत्ती आनी जिका हांव धुवे भशेन समजता ती म्हजी सून सलोनी, म्हजे 2 पूत चिराग आनी जाका हांव पुता भशेन समजता म्हजो जावय नीरज, म्हजी प्रिय नातरां रनिसा, रैना, रणवीर आनी रेहान हांणी म्हाका जिणेंत उपाट खोस दिल्या. हांवें म्हजे जिणेंत म्हजो कान पिळपाचो अधिकार फक्त 3 जाणांक दिलो. एक म्हजी व्हडली भयण जी ना ह्या संवसारांत, दिदी मिनाक्षी, दुसरी म्हजी धूव दत्ती आनी तिसरी म्हजी 6 वर्सांची नात रनिसा. राग आयल्यार रनिसा म्हाका म्हणटा, पप्पा तूं मेंटल. अगो मेंटल म्हणल्यार कितें? मेंटल म्हणल्यार पिसो. अहो तू कोणें सांगलें तें? गो साई मामान सांगलें. असो साई मामा हांगा मेंटल. आनी रनिसा जेन्ना पळय म्हाका पिसो म्हणटा, म्हाका खरें दिसता हांव पिसो. चिरागाचे आनी म्हजे संबंद इतले इश्टागतीचे. चिराग म्हणटा पप्पा तुजी चुकता, तूं बुर्र. चिराग म्हाका जेन्ना पळय बुर्र म्हणटा म्हाका दिसता खरेंच हांव बुर्र. हांवें जर म्हज्या बापायक बुर्र म्हणिल्लो आवय. म्हज्या व्यावसायीक जिणेंत यशांत म्हजो मेवणो दीप कारापुरकार हाचो खूब वांटो आसा. ताचो हांव गौरवपूर्ण उल्लेख करपाक सोदतां. थँक्यू दिपू. म्हजे कर्मचारी काणो, रामनाथ, सिनारी, श्रीकांत, आशीष, शरणू, सुमित, प्रवीण, गांवकार, सुप्रभात, सर्वानंद, पवन, मकरंद, प्रशांत, मारिया, स्वाती 1, स्वाती 2, बॅटी, पूनम, विरेन, सुरेन, दिलीप ह्या सगळ्यांचो हांव उपकारी आसा. तांकां हांव मना काळजांतल्यान दिनवासतां. म्हजे सारथी पिंटू आनी परशुराम, आमच्या घरांत काम करपी सुकांती, एल्लम्मा, पुष्पा, नागवेणी ह्या सगळ्यांचे हांव उपकार आठयतां. म्हजो मामा वसंत मामा दिवाळेक आपल्या नोकराक ओवाळटालो. ह्या दिवाळेक ह्या सगळ्यांक ओवाळचें अशें म्हाका दिसता. आनी निमाणें म्हजे तुमी सगळे इश्ट हांकां हांव केन्नाच विसरपाक शकना. आमच्या इश्टागतीक सुक्ती येवची न्ही, आमच्या इश्टागतीक सदांच जोरगतच आसची. आमची इश्टागत शुक्ल पक्षांतल्या शुक्लेंदू चंद्रा प्रमाणे वाडत वचची. हांवें म्हजे जिणेंत म्हज्या फटकळपणा खातीर खूब लोकांक दुखयलें, जाणीवपूर्वक आनी अजाणीवपूर्वक. आय थिंक मार्क ट्वेन सेड, इफ आय डोंट रिमेंबर हू सेड इट, I sell it in the name of Mark Twain. He said, if you feel you are a hammer, you consider everybody is a nail. हांवें जिणेंत अशें धरलें की हांव तुती आनी तुमी सगळे खेळे, मारीत सुटलो. मागीर खूब फावटी चुकलें. हांवें जांकां दुखयलें तांची हांव मना काळजांतल्यान क्षमा मागतां. म्हाका खूब त्रास दिले लोकांनी, खूब त्रास दिले. बकतशायो केल्यो, पुलीस कंप्लेनी केल्यो, टिका केली. ह्या सगळ्यांक हांव क्षमा करतां. भारतीय संस्कृतीची 2 मुल्यां, नमस्तुते नमस्कार करप आनी क्षमस्व मे. म्हणून एका वटेन कृतज्ञतायेन हांव कांय लोकांक नमस्कार करतां आनी दुसरे वटेन तांची क्षमा मागतां. Friends, I have always played technically correct cricket. I have always played with straight bat. I have never gone on back foot. I have always played front foot. म्हजे खाजगी, व्यावसायिक आनी सार्वजनीक जिणेंत हांवें हायेस्ट स्टँडर्ड ऑफ मॉरॅलिटी आपणायल्या. म्हजी जीण हांवें स्पॉटलेसली क्लीन दवरल्या. म्हज्या स्वभावांत तुमकां बौद्धीक अहंकार, इंटॅलेक्च्युअल एरोगन्स दिसूं येता, पूण म्हज्या अंतरंगांत, अंतर्मनांत एक बौद्धीक नंबळाय आसा. ज्ञानाची मर्यादा आनी अज्ञानाचें सार्वभौमत्व हांव मानतां. हांवें एके कडेन म्हणलां, जाका हांव गिन्यानाचो गर्भवास समजतालो ते म्हज्या अज्ञानाचें आकवारपण आशिल्लें हें म्हाका कळ्ळें. पानगळींत एक एक पान गळून निष्पर्ण जाल्ल्या रुखाची निष्पर्ण नबळाय म्हज्यांत येवं दी. हांव बहुप्रसवा लेखक. म्हज्या बरपांत स्टायल आनी सबस्टन्स आसा, ओग आसा, फ्लो आसा म्हूण वाचप्याक ते आवडटा. आनी चडशे म्हजे वाचक बायलो. खंय लग्नाक गेल्यार एक जाणटी बायल येता, तुज्या म्हाका आवडटा. एक तरणाटी बायल येता, तुका आवडटा. एक बाळान निकतेच जाल्ल्या बायलेन म्हाका सांगलें तुजी जाय काय जुंय वाचलें. हांव प्रेग्नंट जाल्यार इतलें प्रसन्न दिसलें. हे फिडबॅक मेळटकीर आनंद जाता. इश्टानो, भारतीय संस्कृती एकवचनी न्ही, भारतीय संस्कृती बहुवचनी. गणेश देवीनीच म्हाका सांगलें भारताक पयलीं इंडिया म्हणनाशिल्लें, दे यूज्ड टू से इंडिया प्लुरल. आमच्या संस्कृत श्लोकांनी चडसो अहम ना. अहम म्हणजे हांव. सहनव, सहनव पुनक्तू, सहनव म्हणजे आमी दोगूय, सर्वे आमी सगळे. एकाच कडेन अहम आसा. अहम ब्रह्मास्मी, आय एम द ब्रह्मा. तो अहमाचें थंय उदात्तीकरण करता. आफ्रिका खंडांत उंबरू नांवाची एक भाशा आसा. त्या भाशेंत एक अशी म्हणणी आसा, हांव आसा कित्याक तुमी आसा. तुमी आसा म्हणून हांव आसा. जपानी भाशेंत हांवें अशें केलें तशें केलें अशी वाक्यांत ना. हें म्हजे कडल्यान घडलें. प्रॉडक्ट, आमी कलेक्टीव प्रॉडक्ट असो तो कॉन्सेप्ट. म्हाका दिसता म्हाका 80 वर्सांचें आयुश्य मेळचें आनी हांव तुमकां वचन दितां 70 ते 80 ही जिणेंतली म्हजें दशक सगळ्यांत प्रॉडक्टीव आसतलें. इन टर्म्स ऑफ बिझनस एक्सपान्शन, in terms of business consolidation, in terms of literary career, and in terms of socio-political activism. आज गोंयांत आनी देशांत जें चल्लां, जो धार्मीक मूलतत्ववाद पातळ्ळा, ताणें मन खंती जाता. पूण हांव निराशावादी न्ही. आय एम इटर्नल रॅशनल ऑप्टिमिस्ट. आमचेर काळान एक जापसालदारकी दिल्या. डॉक्टर थरूर, डॉक्टर देवी, विदोद, अवधूत बाब, दोतोर Theophile. We have to safeguard plural, diverse mosaic of Indian culture. We have to ensure that fundamentalist forces ruling Delhi, Panji, Lucknow and Mumbai are dethroned. We have to create grand narration. This grand narration should be such that fundamentalist narration of Hindutva should look irrelevant and redundant. हांव म्हजी भाशण म्हजे 3 आवडटे ऑथर तांचे कोटेशन सांगून सोंपयता. मिलान कुंदेरा, आल्बर्ट कामू आनी poet Robert Frost. To quote Milan Kundera, I am celebrating the festival of insignificance. You said that. I am experiencing unbelievable lightness of being. I am experiencing unbelievable lightness of being. I have mastered escape velocity to migrate from finite to infinite, from temporal to the timeless, from the movement to stillness, from knowledge to knowing, and from becoming to being. It's very important, becoming to being. Albert Camus said, winter is a second spring when every leaf wants to be a flower. I will add, and every flower wants to be fruit. In my sunset year, twilight years, I wish and pray that every leaf on my tree becomes a flower, and every flower on my tree becomes a fruit. And I end my speech with those immortal lines of poet Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, and I have promises to keep. I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Thank you. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mr. Datta Damodar Naik. Just 2 words, we are touched. And now, for the final word of thanks, Advocate Cleopat Almeida Cudino.
Vote of thanks is always a very onerous task as people start living. We are specially indebted to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who accepted our invitation despite his schedule. His presence here added special grace for his felicitation function. Dr. Devi and Vinod Sirsat accepted our invitation, and we are very thankful. Of course, all of you present here today require special thanks. We have with us Mr. and Mrs. Kitwaz. We have Yuri Alema, the leader of opposition. We have Damodar Mauzo. We have Uday Bemre, and many eminent personalities in the audience to whom we are all grateful. Special thanks to the management of Vidyaniketan, to the management of Nanotel, which helped us in organizing this function. Tito Sports and Cultural Troupe Kankwana also requires to be thanked. Thank you one and all.